Greetings, friends. Welcome to a special edition of In Other News, requested by the hundreds of tweets and emails I've gotten in the last 30 minutes because of the death of Hugo Chavez. So, in what I hope to be more of a regular assignment, I'm hitting you from the road to talk about the world events that are shaking our times and that you want to know more about. You need to know more about so you're smarter about what's happening on the planet. So I'm here from downtown Austin, Texas, where the big South by Southwest conference is getting ready to go down, in this sweet little bar called the Ginger Man. And they just opened up the door behind me. It used to be a wall. Now it's open. I don't even know what that cool-ass building is, but that's neither here nor there. We're here to talk about what's going on with Hugo's death. As we have been following for this class and for our awesome plaid friends who have been following us for years anyway, you know that Hugo Chavez is a firebrand of Venezuela, a huge U.S. hater. He never hated the U.S. people. He always hated the U.S. government, thought that they were imperialist pigs, trying to put down him and his leftist movement. And he's been quite important to the wider Latin America because of his self-proclaimed socialist revolution, a movement towards the further and further deep extreme left. Not full communism, but a full-on socialist experiment where his type of politics, Venezuela is a democracy. It's been a democracy. He was democratically elected, whether you like him or not. But it's a politically a democratic state that wanted to push the economic spectrum a little bit further to the left, if not a lot more to the left, in terms of state control of businesses, state control of resources, in order to make revenues or collect revenues to redistribute greater good to society in terms of free healthcare, education, stuff like that. So pretty hardcore leftist. He has led the self-titled, I believe Chavez came up with the title, the Bolivarian Revolution, thus named after Simon Bolivar, one of the heroes of the independence movements across all of Latin America from their Spanish and Portuguese colonial masters a couple hundred years ago. So Hugo's been quite important. He really stepped up and took the place of, I think, Fidel Castro, who for years, if not decades, actually definitely decades, was kind of the poster child of the left movement under full-on communism that Cuba had been experimenting with and tried. Of course, you know that I think they have kind of failed miserably at that hardcore leftist movement. And now let's get back to Hugo. Hugo really, I think, one of his heroes was Castro. He was wildly supported within Venezuela because Venezuela, like most Latin American countries, has a huge wealth disparity gap, a huge amount of poorer, underclass people. And so in a democracy, here's the problem with letting too many people get too poor. In a democracy, the poor people have a vote. And so when you have 50 or 60 or 70% of the people living in poverty, they will vote for people who promise to give them stuff, who promise to give them a more equal footing, who promise to give them perhaps communism or socialism or some other ism which redistributes wealth to the people. That's exactly why Hugo was so popular in Venezuela. It's why he's been in office for a decade. But now let's get up to current events. What does it mean for today's world, where Hugo Chavez has just passed away, perhaps an hour or two ago, after a 4-month battle with cancer in a Cuban hospital? Here's what it means. Here's the bigger deal behind all this. I think it's a huge deal because it's going to throw some disarray into Venezuelan politics for definitely the foreseeable near future and possibly for the foreseeable longer future. The problem with being an exceptionally popular and powerful leader, whether you think he's a dictator or not, I'll leave that to you. But he definitely was the most popular politician in Venezuela. He definitely was with no close second, leader of this Bolivarian revolution. A firebrand, outspoken against imperialism, outspoken against the United States in particular, but was trying to lead this big movement towards the left for all of Latin America, not just for Venezuela. We can debate later about whether it was successful or not. Probably it's not as much as he would have hoped it was. But the problem with him being so popular and so powerful and pulling in so much power to himself is there's no backup. So right now in Venezuelan politics, there is no one that can fill his shoes. Quite frankly, nobody could. Being the person that he was, with a powerful ideology, very popular, outspoken. Those people don't come around too often. So point one of what's going to happen now that Hugo Chavez has passed away is that Venezuela has a gigantic leadership vacuum. He did not groom anyone to take over for him, and I don't think he could. Again, he's one of those people, it's a historic figure. You can't just replace, George Washington or, Lenin or Churchill. These are historic people that do really big things, and so there's no backup. In Venezuela in particular, there's no backup because their politics has been kind of fractured. Hugo's movement itself is still probably the most popular political party in Venezuela. But quite frankly, him and his party have done a lot to cater the power and pull the power to themselves since Hugo's been in power. But the problem with that, again, is that, the political party will still maintain control of Venezuela and still will be popular because they're all about just redistributing wealth to poorer people. But nobody can fill this guy's shoes. There is going to be a huge leadership vacuum that's going to throw Venezuelan politics into chaos, maybe for a very long time, because now what you're going to see is a bit of a counter-revolution, perhaps, where the folks that don't like Hugo Chavez, more, say, conservative center-right folks, who have not liked him from the get-go, who have not liked him for a decade, and who made the biggest political gains in the election that just happened 4 months ago. They didn't win, but they made the biggest political gains. You're going to see that this group is empowered and say, now's our time. The big head honcho, the big cheese is gone. They have nobody that can fill his shoes. Now we should make a concerted effort to regain control of the Venezuelan government and do things that we want to do. Again, I'm not voting that one side's right and one side's wrong. I'm saying here's what's going to happen. At the same time, what you're going to have is what we call a huge sympathy vote. So Hugo's gone, and he was wildly popular. Again, whether you hated the guy or not, he did win every election for the last 12 years. So you're going to have all of his fan base and supporters of the leftist movement in general in Venezuela, who, yes, are going to be distraught. They have lost not just the leader of their political party, but again, a kind of historic figure. And you're going to see a huge outpouring of a sympathy vote that people will say, we want the movement to continue. We want the ideals of Chavez to continue for Venezuela. So what you're going to have now, again, in the next 6 months to a year is, who's going to be in charge? No one can fill this guy's shoes. The movement may gain some significant strength, actually, from losing him, but the opposition was already in a growing power situation. So problems for Venezuela in the very near future, if not indefinitely, until things stabilize, and I cannot predict how long that will take. Nobody can. Internationally, how does this project what's going to happen in Latin America and the world in general? I don't know that it changes that much. Everybody says, the U.S. hated Hugo Chavez and Hugo Chavez hated America. That's fine. But I don't know that his passing really is changing the equation that much. If hardcore leftists maintain power in Venezuela, it's not going to change anything with the U.S.-Venezuelan relationship. And increasingly, Venezuela wasn't relying on the United States for very much. So this may soften the U.S.'s rhetoric towards Venezuela, but I don't know that it's going to soften Venezuela's rhetoric towards the United States. So don't see a lot of stuff changing in the relationships until a new leader is chosen for Venezuela, and we then see what they have to say, what direction they want to take the country in. And indeed, if the opposition wins, if the center-right conservative folks were to take over power in the next year or two in Venezuela, then yes, you're going to see gigantic improved relationship between the U.S. and Venezuela. All that remains to be seen, though. Nothing much is going to happen in the next year or two. Final point. What will change internationally and why I think this is a big deal. Love him, like him, hate him, want him to go to hell. It doesn't matter. That's your opinion. But Hugo Chavez was a huge, huge, huge force for a global movement, certainly a Latin American movement that could be construed as a global movement towards more liberal left economic and political systems. There is no dispute about that. He may be the world's champion at that since Fidel Castro retired and went away. And that's gone. So what had been happening already, and I have talked about this in other podcasts, by the way, is that Hugo and his Bolivarian revolution movement towards the left is significant. and interesting, and really all of Latin America had been moving towards further and further left as a whole. Hugo would have liked to think that maybe he and his movement had were the reason for that. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But certainly in the last several years, what you've seen is a backtracking in the last several years of folks who say, yeah, we're political leaders in Latin America. And yes, we are left-leaning, but we're not as far left as Hugo Chavez. Leaders, particularly from Brazil, who are definitely center-left for the people, want to provide, health care and equal rights and everything for people. Even they have said, no, we're about the people, but we're not that far extreme. We're not taking over businesses. We're not nationalizing the oil industry. We are going to restructure our government through taxation and other ways in order to provide benefits, but we're not taking over industries and nationalizing stuff like the Venezuelan government is. There had already been a movement for several years that had been more moderate, let's say. So a leftist slant, but more moderate, not as extreme as the Chavez example, which Chavez, of course, had been promoting. So his big allies, of course, were the Castro brothers in Cuba, a failed communist state trying to be extreme left, but also Evo Morales over in Bolivia, who really took his cues from Chavez and said, oh, yes, I'm going to nationalize stuff and do stuff to give more stuff to the people here in my country. I think people of that ilk, of that side of the spectrum, from that extreme side of the spectrum, this is a really big loss for them. They've lost their leader. I won't say they've lost their way, but certainly that whole movement is going to lose steam. There's no doubt about it. And you combine that with the more moderate leftist stance that countries like Brazil, Argentina perhaps, Mexico perhaps, more moderate leftist stance, they're the ones that have been doing better anyway. They've been economically doing better than the Venezuelan example. And with the death of Chavez, I think you're going to see the end altogether of the hardcore take on the Bolivarian revolution. Most Latin American governments and countries will continue to elect leftist leaders, but just center left, or just slightly left of center leaders, not extreme left. I don't think you're going to see this movement continue with as much steam, and in fact, maybe not at all, where you would elect leaders like Morales or Chavez or the Castros who say, oh, we're going to take over everything in our country, and we're going to nationalize all industry and kick out all multinational corporations and make all the money to give to the people. I don't think you're going to see that anymore. I truly believe that the death of Chavez is the death, I won't say the death of the Bolivarian revolution, but certainly the extreme manifestation of leftist movement across all of Latin America probably will diminish wildly with the death of Hugo Chavez. That may be the most important point of his passing. It is a movement which he was really passionate about. Again, like him, love him, hate him, doesn't matter. He was truly passionate about it. He truly wanted to see more goods, more services brought to more people of the state, and that's what any good leader really wants. But in his particular brand was through pretty extreme leftist economic control. I think that has now gone away, and you're going to see more success stories like Brazil, more moderate left, win the day in Latin America as a whole. Does that make more sense? Are there more questions you have about the relationships or what change is going to happen because of the death of this pretty significant leader? Again, Venezuela is not a powerhouse leader on planet Earth, and the president of Venezuela is not necessarily a big world player, but Hugo Chavez was quite special in that he made his movement into a global news story. He's been doing it for over a decade, and that all kind of comes to an end right now. Short-term chaos and political instability in Venezuela. Longer-term, perhaps warming ties between Venezuela and the U.S. and other Western countries, maybe. That depends on the next leadership. But most importantly, an end of a movement which was quite significant for Latin America. And it's not dead, but it's certainly modified and more moderate. Modified and moderate now with the passing of Hugo Chavez. Hit me up with any questions or concerns, or if you learned anything at all from this particular podcast live from here in Austin, Texas. But for now, as I'm going to do, party on.